Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Omega Insight. Again, just want to remind you the website is up www.theomegavector.org, and we are scheduled to do our first Omega 1 program since the pandemic on the weekend of July 9th through the 11th. You can register at the website. Tonight's topic, I wanted to kind of go along the lines of the things I've been talking about so far this month. We talked about happiness on the first week, and last week we talked about the reasons that cause us to be unhappy. Tonight, I want to talk about the subject is irrational ideas that cause us to sustain emotional disturbances. I delivered something like this back in 2008. And I really think it's something important to bring about. Again, it's a really good topic, and I think it's worthy to revisit. There's 18 or 19 different ideas that we present that cause us to have emotional disturbances. And when we feed into them, it sustains it. So let me just break this down for a second. So emotional, obviously, we're being emotional rather than rational. Disturbances, the Webster defines this as an interruption of a settled or peaceful condition. So that's a disturbance. Therefore, an emotional disturbance is a reaction causing me to be unsettled. And then if we go to irrational ideas, so irrational means without reason. And a sustained means to continue on for a prolonged or an extended period without an interruption. That's sustained. So the topic, an irrational idea which causes and sustain emotional disturbances, essentially means ideas without reason which cause us to prolong without interruption reactions which are unsettling. Now, that's a mouthful, and the question you'd have to ask yourself is what human being would intentionally want to prolong unsettled state of being? You would be surprised how much of this we carry. And that's why, obviously, we want to bring this to your attention. These are things that cause us an emotional disturbance, which continues that reactive thing within us. Now, the first idea is I'm going to just quote what's written. The desire It's a desire, necessity for a human being to be loved or approved of virtually every significant other person in his community. In other words, we have this incredible desire to be approved of and loved by everyone we know. And if we don't, we are driven to get them to like us and love us. We're driven so much by this desire that we sell out on all levels. Um, we lose sight of our core and we do flip flops just to get them to okie dokie us and make them happy. We actually become shallow and wilted when we do this. And therefore, we give the other person the power over our well being because we're emotionally upset. They don't like me. Why don't they don't like me? Why don't they don't like me? Why are they upset? And we drive ourselves emotionally disturbed. I can't think of a better way to say that. The second idea is that one should be thoroughly competent, adequate, and achieving to all possible respects if you're considered to be worthwhile. So I should be adequate and achieving, thoroughly competent in everything I do in order for me to feel valuable. Of course, that's I don't want to say insane, irrational thought because there's always room to grow. And every person has value, whether you've reached competency maximum, your maximum competency or not, you still have value. Every individual has value. When we put this out, what we end up doing is we start getting um, feeling unworthy and we put our attention that, oh, that's the worthy person and I don't have any worthy in it for myself. So self absorbed is not self reliance. Self appointed, those are people who are arrogant, judgmental, and egotistical, and they need to know everything about everything in order for them to feel secure. And that will drive you emotionally disturbed because you can't know everything about everybody and you still have value or oneself worthwhile. The next idea is that It is awful and catastrophic when things that are not the way the one that you think they should be. And therefore, we should be upset because things aren't going our way. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. I should be upset because things are not going my way, and that person should act that way, and that person should do that thing, and this situation should unfold that way. And then I get myself all upset. I'm sure you've seen this. People get riled and upset because things aren't going their way. It could lead us to temper tantrums. It lead us to be obsessive compulsive. Has to be a certain way, and then of course leads us to disappointment as well. So that's another thing that brings again emotional disturbance, where our peace is unsettled, and we are now riding that wave of emotional disturbance, and we keep sustaining it because every time we think about it, we think about how it's not going the way we want it to go, and and then continue ad infinitum. um, the next irrational idea is our unhappiness is external and caused, and that people have little or no ability to control their circumstances or their sorrows and disturbances. So everything that happens to us, I don't have control over it. Well, that is partially true. Life unfolds, but I always have the ability to respond to it. Always have the ability to respond to it. And when I think that I have a response, I have no ability to respond. Naturally, I'm going to just react and, oh, I feel helpless and, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. And then I suffer and I perpetuating my suffering. I perpetuate the suffering, which of course leads me as a continued, unstable, unsettled emotional disturbance. Number six, the idea that if something is dangerous or fearsome, we should be terribly concerned about it and keep dwelling on it and the possibility of it occurring. This connects us to worry naturally. But if we think about, I remember I had a conversation with someone thinking about, the person who's going to push the button and nuclear war and blah, and panicking. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And there's really nothing that you can do about that particular instance. Unless you go, try to protect that person who's pushing the button, there really isn't anything we can do. And so by having that over and over again, it relives it. But here's a fascinating, interesting fact on this one. This is phobias that occur as well. The birth of phobias here. There's something dangerous is going to happen, so we develop phobias. There are over 530 different types of phobia. Amazingly enough, there are. Agoraphobia is something we used to talk about in the classroom, where people are so terrified they can't leave their house. That's agoraphobic. We have tons of different types of phobias that exist in our lives. Um, and of course, when we're consumed with that phobia, our emotional disturbances continue to be perpetuated. It's really difficult to break free from a phobia because it all creates in the mind. We're thinking of, oh, here's what's going to happen, the worst case scenario, and we live it over and over. And the other dangerous thing about it is we're living as if it actually happened. And we're experiencing the trauma as actually happened, even though it didn't. It all is up here in our thinking, which is why it's considered an irrational idea. The next one is it's easier to avoid things than to face them. Like life has difficulties and responsibilities. So we should avoid them because it's too hard. It's too hard. Avoidance is not the same as acceptance. So avoidance, for lack of a better word, creates a coward, which cowards become weak and they're unable to choose their own responsibility and actions and thoughts. They're just cowards and follow like sheep. I'm just going to follow along. So it's when we have that thought, well, it's easier to avoid. No, it's not. It's easier to face the music. That's something I grew up with. It's easier to face the music. It might be difficult, it might be hard, but you know what? Face the music, get it done. And for the most part, it's less painful than if you were to drag it out. I remember having a conversation with someone whose daughter kept lying. And they would say to her, listen, you're going to get punished more for lying than if you were to tell me what actually happened. And the young daughter just couldn't. She just rather lie, is what she ended up doing, just because she was afraid of the consequences. The next irrational idea is that one should be dependent on others, that we should be solely dependent on others, and need someone for support stronger than ourselves to rely upon. Now, this is a little bit of a quandary here because it is important to find people who are strong to emulate things that we want to be and to look up to and help us want to be better individuals, but not to rely upon them. When we have a strong individual and we completely rely on them, two things occur. The first thing happens that is this other person now has a double burden. They're living for them and for you. So life is twice as hard as them. And unfortunately, this is where breaks of relationships happen because somebody just resents the fact that they have to take care of everybody instead of everyone doing equal share. And then the second thing that happens is we become dependent, completely and totally dependent. And unfortunately, we become so dependent that we're even afraid to express our own thoughts. Well, is that going to be okay? Would you mind? And we become very timid and weak, and we lose the power, our personal power. We give it away. That's the danger of being solely dependent on another individual. Is it helpful to seek advice? Absolutely. Go seek advice for the things that you don't know. Go ask for help when you need help, but do not be dependent upon another individual to live your life for you. That's an irrational idea, and naturally, it's going to be an upsetting disturbance within you. And the last one that I want to mention is the idea that one should be, that one's past history is an all important determinator of how they are today, and you can't break free from that. So, once a thief, always a thief. Once a cheater, always a cheater, and that's not fair. What ends up happening is we lose the sight of forgiveness. So when we hold somebody to their history, their past behavior, and they can't overcome it, we're punishing them over and over and over. And when we do this to ourselves, we punish ourselves over. Oh, I'm the way I am because this is the way I grew up. Well, no, that life already happened. That event already occurred. You're the way you are because of the story you carry in your mind. And you keep feeding that and perpetuating it over and over. Well, I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong enough. I mean, how many times have we had conversations with people who feel like they're not strong enough, that they can't possibly face the obstacle that's in their life at that moment, so that they feel like they need to rely upon there's always a reason why they're relying upon another individual. Again, these are lists of irrational ideas that sustain our emotional disturbances. When we get caught up in these things, we are reactive and we become more and more reactive. And when we are more and more reactive, we're less in charge of our personal responsibility. We're less in charge of us as an individual. We start reacting and causing more harm rather than stopping and think, well, how do I want to choose to this? Well, how would I like to face this? How do I want to handle this situation? So that's just right there. I'm just going to stop right now. Next week, I'm going to pick it up and finish up with the rest of the irrational ideas. Remember, these are things that we start believing and taking on and sustain them because we believe it to be true or we are consumed with it. I mentioned that last week. We end up being consumed with things. And once we're consumed with something, and as I said, these are things tonight that I mentioned, we sustain and we keep bringing it up and keep bringing it up, and we keep having that emotional disturbance, which robs our peace. And when our peace is robbed, naturally there's no happiness, and we feel stress. Stress increases. So these are things to look out for to help us gain our peace. So thanking you for joining me this evening. I look forward to next week when we finish up the list of irrational ideas that cause us to sustain emotional disturbances. Have a good evening now. Bye now.